Legendary Clint Eastwood once said something that few dared to hear in full, and even fewer would have imagined him saying out loud, that not everyone is welcome at the end of his story. At 94, with a life that has been both immortalized on the silver screen and shadowed by private grief, he leans back in his chair, eyes narrowing, and recounts a world only he has truly lived. The walls of his quiet Carmel home seem to press in as he whispers names, memories, and regrets that have never escaped his mind, each word heavy with the weight of decades. There is a tremor in his voice, not from age, but from the truths he has carried alone, truths about betrayals, losses, and the people who haunted the edges of his life without ever knowing the cost. He recalls early Hollywood, the glittering nights, and the friendships that promised permanence but dissolved under fame's relentless glare. There is one actor he can barely say the name of, a figure once close who twisted loyalty into rivalry, whose shadow still lingers in old photographs that Clint never touches. "I'd rather not see them," he mutters almost to himself. "When it's time to go, some people, they don't belong in my last moments." His eyes glance at a framed poster of Unforgiven, and he chuckles bitterly. The irony isn't lost on him. He has played the unforgiving man on screen, yet the unforgivable in life cuts far deeper. He pauses, thinking of family, daughters, grandchildren, the ones he raised quietly, shielded from the chaos of fame. There was love, yes, but also tension, fights that burned in the silence after the cameras stopped rolling. He confesses a fear of their sorrow, a dread of watching them wrestle with grief under the gaze of strangers and opportunists. "Some people," he whispers again, "would turn mourning into spectacle." His hands tremble slightly as he sets down a glass of whiskey he barely took. Beloved Clint Eastwood leans further back, the sunlight fading into a soft gray, the shadows of his past stretching long across the walls. He speaks now of friends who became strangers, alliances broken over petty jealousies, and the cruel calculus of Hollywood fame. He mentions a legendary actor, one whose charm once seemed boundless, who later became a ghost in Clint's life. Someone who smiled at his triumphs but whispered doubts behind closed doors. "It's funny," he says, voice thick with emotion, "how the people you think will stand by you are the ones who vanish when it matters most." There is a pause, almost imperceptible, as he remembers the nights he lay awake, wondering if he had misjudged the people he trusted, or if life simply revealed their true selves too late. He turns to the tragedies that marked him quietly, far from public view. Deaths of close friends, some sudden, some after long illnesses, left him reeling, each loss carving deeper grooves into his soul. He recalls the phone call that came in the middle of a winter night, informing him that a dear co-star had passed, leaving behind children who never understood their father's absence. Clint's hands grip the armrests of his chair, knuckles white, as he recalls driving through empty streets to find solace in solitude, in the only place that felt safe, his own home. "I've seen too many people cry because I couldn't fix what was broken," he admits. "And some of those people, I just can't face them at the end." There are moments of quiet confession where he speaks of family tensions that the tabloids never knew. Daughters estranged, grandchildren who sometimes feared the distance his fame created, lovers who left with words that still haunt him. He mentions one particular heartbreak, a private affair of the heart that ended abruptly, leaving letters unread, apologies unspoken. "If they're there," he murmurs. Respected Clint Eastwood lets the silence stretch for a long moment, as if listening to ghosts only he can hear. Then he begins to speak of Hollywood's darker corridors, where charm masks cruelty and fame often leaves a trail of ruined lives. He recalls a famous director, whose name he barely dares utter, whose ambition crushed careers and friendships alike. "He smiled like a saint," Clint says, voice low, "but he took from you everything you didn't even know you had." There's a pain in his tone, a mixture of disbelief and sorrow, as he describes the subtle betrayals that accumulate over decades, the deals made behind closed doors, the whispers in corridors, the promises that dissolve under pressure. Every name etched into his memory carries its own story of heartbreak, envy, and regret. He confesses the rare moments when his own temper got the better of him, when his instinct to protect himself or his family caused rifts that never fully healed. "I've hurt people I loved," he admits, eyes dropping to the floor. "And some of them, I'll never be able to make it right." There is a trembling in his hands now, almost imperceptible, as he touches the edges of old photographs. Portraits of lovers, colleagues, and friends, many of whom passed away long before their time. He remembers secret apologies, letters he never sent, and the gnawing feeling that life's timing was never his to control. Illness and age have sharpened this awareness, turning minor regrets into quiet, persistent grief that shadows even the brightest memories. He leans back further, voice thick with emotion, as he speaks of family pain and tragedy. There were daughters he failed to reach in moments of need, grandchildren who sometimes saw him as distant or untouchable. He remembers one Christmas morning, decades ago, when a misunderstanding between him and a loved one led to tears and silence that lingered. Legendary Clint Eastwood's gaze drifts toward the window, where the Pacific stretches endless and indifferent, and he begins to speak of betrayal in its most personal form. He recalls friends and colleagues who once shared dreams and ambitions, only to let jealousy and greed fracture those bonds. "You think you know people," he says, voice barely above a whisper. "Until the money, the fame, or the opportunity, it reveals who they really are." There is a hollow ache in his tone as he remembers late-night phone calls, unexpected confrontations, and the quiet disappearance of people he once trusted implicitly. Each incident is etched deeply into his mind, a collection of small wounds that have never truly healed. He pauses and tells a story about a legendary actress, a Hollywood icon who once leaned on him for support, but later became part of a scandal that threatened his own reputation. Clint shakes his head slowly, the memory still raw. "I helped them when no one else would," he admits. "And yet when the cameras weren't rolling, some of those same people, they turned their backs." He admits the bitterness that lingered, the sleepless nights haunted by unspoken words and broken promises. Even decades later, those memories surface in quiet moments, gnawing at him like a shadow that refuses to leave. The conversation shifts to family again, this time to heartbreak and loss too profound for public eyes. He recounts a painful estrangement with a daughter, the miscommunications that grew into silence, and the lingering weight of words left unsaid. There is a tremor in his voice as he speaks of grandchildren who struggled to understand the man behind the legend, and of moments he wishes he could undo. Birthday parties missed, advice unoffered, affection withheld by circumstance. "Time doesn't wait," he murmurs, "and sometimes it takes too long for people to forgive. Or to..." Beloved Clint Eastwood lets out a slow, deliberate breath, the weight of decades pressing on his chest like the Pacific winds outside his Carmel home. He begins speaking now of Hollywood parties, premieres, and award nights, the glitz and glamour that the world sees. But he leans closer and lowers his voice, revealing the hidden pain beneath. "Everyone smiles for the cameras," he says. "But behind the laughter, there's envy, there's judgment. There are people waiting for you to stumble." His fingers trace the edge of a faded script on the table, a reminder of projects long completed and opportunities lost to trust misplaced. Names hover unspoken in the air, friends turned rivals, colleagues who smiled but plotted, lovers who deceived. Each one a ghost he has carried silently, a ledger of the human cost of fame. He recounts a night that still haunts him, a gathering of Hollywood's elite where laughter and champagne masked quiet malice. A legendary producer, once considered a mentor, whispered words that cut him to the bone, revealing ambitions that threatened both family and career. Clint shudders as he recalls the coldness in that voice, the way deceit can wear the mask of friendship. "I realize then," he murmurs, "not everyone deserves to witness the end of my story. Some people, they would turn it into a show of their own making." There's a hollow sadness in his eyes as he speaks, the kind that comes from understanding the fragility of trust and the permanent sting of betrayal. Family grief enters the room again, unbidden and raw. He remembers a daughter's tears, the ones she hid when cameras weren't around, the nights he wished he could hold her and erase the distance his career had caused. He speaks of a grandchild, once sick, whose quiet courage humbled him more than any award or standing ovation ever could. "Life isn't just movies," he says softly, almost H. He gazes at photographs of old friends, mentors, and co-stars, some gone, some estranged, each one a testament to the complex web of relationships that defined his extraordinary life. "When it's time," he whispers, "I want peace. I want the faces I love. The rest, they don't deserve that honor." The confession hangs in the air, heavy and intimate, a revelation of a man who has lived through fame, scandal, grief, and triumph, who now chooses, with deliberate solemnity, who will witness the closing of his story and who will fade into memory. Respected Clint, Eastwood leans forward, the weight of nearly a century pressing on his broad shoulders, and speaks in a voice that trembles not from age, but from the raw honesty of a lifetime lived in the unforgiving glare of fame. "I've seen it all," he says softly, almost to the empty room. The smiles that hide knives, the friends who vanish when it matters most, the love that falters under pressure. He closes his eyes for a long moment, letting the memories wash over him, the betrayals, the scandals, the quiet heartbreaks that never made a headline. Each name, each incident, carries a sting, a reminder that life, like film, has scenes of darkness intercut with moments of brilliance, and only the brave, or the fortunate, ever survive both intact. He recounts the final years of some of his closest friends, icons of Hollywood who had once shared the stage, the set, the laughter, and whose deaths left him hollow. Their last words echo still, carried by whispers in hospital rooms, letters left unread, phone calls that came too late. Clint's hand trembles slightly as he touches a photograph of one, a friend whose career was as turbulent as it was brilliant, a man whose absence still leaves a space too vast for words. "Some people I've lost," he says, voice thick with emotion. "I'd give anything to see one more smile from them. Others?" Finally, he gazes toward the horizon, where the Pacific merges with the sky and lets the quiet settle over him. "I've lived. I've loved. I've lost," he whispers. "And I've learned that in the end, your final moments belong to you, and to the ones who truly care." The room is still, heavy with the intimacy of his revelation, a confession that is as private as it is profound. In his mind, the list is clear, the choice deliberate, the last act controlled. Peace is not guaranteed, but it can be curated, and for Clint Eastwood, that is enough. The room is silent except for the faint hum of the ocean outside, a vast, indifferent witness to the life of a man who has shaped legend and endured heartbreak in equal measure. Clint Eastwood leans back one last time, eyes closing briefly as if seeing the entirety of his life in a single frame, the triumphs, the betrayals, the loves, the losses, all stitched together in a tapestry no one else could truly understand. "When I go," he whispers, voice trembling yet resolute, "I want it to be clean, simple, and honest. I want the people who mattered, the ones who saw me, really saw me, to be there. The rest can stay away." He recalls almost tenderly the faces of those who shaped him, who walked alongside him through decades of blazing lights and shadowed corridors, friends whose laughter lingered, mentors whose guidance was steadfast, family who bore the brunt of fame's distance but loved fiercely nonetheless. And then he allows himself a rare, private smile at the thought of those who will be absent, whose presence would have tainted the moment with bitterness, envy, or regret. "Some names are meant to fade," he murmurs. "Some memories are meant to stay locked behind closed doors, and that's the way it should be." Clint's hand rests lightly on a photograph of John Wayne, the man who once told him that life and film share a singular,